Now we have a couple of commissioners who are otherwise occupied or on vacation, but I appreciate everybody being available today. I don't know that we will need the allotted time. I have us stopping at 4:30. The August 12 meeting, we were able to stop at 4:15 because, again, this is essentially a business meeting. I'm just mindful, as everybody is, that September is truly right around the corner. And that means we will be in our last 3 months of, there's Commissioner Jones and Jermaine. It means we've got 3 months left to finish our work in every respect. So I think we're making great progress. The panel discussion on best practices was terrific. Thank you again to PETA and Scott, Sheila for their efforts with that. And there has been a flurry of very helpful documents of all sorts as a result of that subcommittee's efforts. So we will talk about all that in just a minute and the other items on the agenda. But welcome, it's great to see all of you. And I am determined that at some point, even if it's a post-November 30 gathering somewhere, that this group will come together in the same room, because I think we're all a little WebEx or Zoomed out. And no offense to WebEx or Zooms, just the way of the world. Okay, well, let's jump in then to the commission business part of the agenda. I hope some of you were able to see right before the meeting started. Apparently, Jasmine had some technical difficulties with the minutes for June 28th, so we'll get them out there and get them approved. There are actually a couple of other sets of minutes because we've been meeting so often that will also need to be up and approved. But Jasmine, we think we can have that. We can have those up either by next time, or frankly, if we have them and they're put on SharePoint, maybe we can just do an email survey and approval.
Yeah, I can have them up on SharePoint over the weekend.
Okay.
And I'll alert everyone, and I will guess that a certain commissioner, maybe named PETA, will have some edits because she's got an eagle eye, but we can approve them over email. That works as well.
Okay, well, if you would just let us know when, and so it's not piecemeal. If they're going to be a couple, that'll be ready in a week or 10 days, and you want to wait and put those up. But just if you send us all an email to, I know we all check SharePoint on a daily, if not hourly basis, but just in case, if you do that, so we can be alerted to go to SharePoint, take a look at the minutes, make any suggested changes or corrections, and move from there, so we don't get too far behind on that. Okay, thank you. All right, the next item to be on the commission business has the excellent title Best Practices Compendium. I'm sure compendium is a word we all use every day in our normal conversation, but it's a good word because, as I mentioned earlier, there is an extraordinary amount of helpful materials that have been distributed. One of the questions that PETA has raised is just sort of the organizational aspect to this, because there is a lot of information. The compendium piece comes from the two things, again, from PETA. One, and Dan, I think this was at the August 12 meeting, this excellent graphic that PETA put together. And if you don't have that, I'll be sure you get it. And then PETA sent an email to everybody on the 18th of August with a best practices suggestions bolded and keyed in sort of step by step where each of the suggestions would fit within the structure of the graphic that PETA designed. I think it's had trademark, if not copyrighted, since, and appropriately so. But the point is, there are a number of excellent things in there, and I think it would be helpful for everyone to go through and look at it. Again, I'm thinking in terms of the final report, and in that same field of thought, we need to go back, look at all of the recommendations, and there were a lot of them. Look at the recommendations that were made and see how we would fit any best practices pieces in there. I know that Steve sent some comments about sort of the takeaways, if you will, from the panel discussion on best practices. But I want to be sure that every subcommittee does that. And again, I think Peter's August 18 summary, if you will, and some time spent looking at the materials that the panelists provided and other things that have come in since then would be helpful. And I would ask all the subcommittee chairs to arrange with your subcommittee members a time to do that before too long here, just so we can, again, I would suggest in the framework of what PETA put out on August 18 for everybody to take a look at, so we can make certain we're bringing things together. Yes, Dan.
Are you finished with that discussion? Because I just want to piggyback.
I think I talked long enough. Please go ahead.
Cooperative purchasing, which was is really a subset of what PETA was doing. And PETA and I did have an extensive phone call with Debbie Grote, who's the Baltimore Metropolitan Council Director of Cooperative Purchasing. It's quite some time ago, and but I do remember most of it. The good news is that for the most part, Baltimore County is doing pretty well in its cooperative purchasing effort. So the finer points of some areas are that sometimes, for example, like getting, during snowstorms when they need to ice the streets, it's actually better to have a local person because they're locally responsive. There's only 2 or 3 manufacturers that make that kind of product nationally. So there's no real reason to do it nationally because you're going to get a local person to deliver it. On the other hand, for other things, piggybacking on a big contract is more advantageous. So it's really product by product and service by service that it comes up. I think the 3 quick takeaways. One is it still always needs to be reviewed. There is a tendency to get locked into these big contracts and not take a fresh look at them. So I think one of the things in PETA, maybe you still have your notes or can adjust to any of this, because it was probably an hour and a half talk. And she also sent me stuff, and I sent it forwarded to Jasmine, I think at the time, but I resent it just a little while ago. That you should always take a fresh look at it anyways, because there's a tendency to just fall into the habit of it. And the second point is that the health insurance pooling, which I brought up here and there, is actually a really good thing and is something that we fully endorse, that be investigated, because that doesn't involve any small business entity or any large business entity. It's something that can be done immediately. Just has to do somebody has to roll up their sleeves and do some legwork about comparing state health insurance costs through versus county. And I think that's pretty much it on the pooling portion. So I think it was overall a pretty good report from the Baltimore County perspective. So that's nice to know. It doesn't always have to be bad news or criticism. But the health insurance pooling, and just to take a fresh look at it periodically when you get in these contracts, maybe some of them can be a little bit shorter from time to time and reviewed. That's really the takeaway message. I'll leave Sheeta if you had something you wanted to add from our conversation. I wanted to summarize it. Good. Okay. Thank you. That's really a subset of best practices, and I thought I'd stick it in at this point.
No, that's fine. And you and I emailed before, I guess it was early August, and I had on my list to ask Dan to talk about cooperative purchasing and the like. And so that's great. And thank you for email you sent today. And Jasmine, I don't know if that was up on SharePoint, or if not, Dan sent an email to Jasmine, me, Elizabeth, and Peter this afternoon. And if that's not on SharePoint, I think that'd be helpful if you put that up, or at least distribute it so everybody has a chance to look at that.
Yes, I'm going to upload this evening. Like I said, I was having issues getting on SharePoint earlier, so I'm hoping
Sure.
after this meeting I can restart and try.
Right.
Elizabeth, I want to raise something that I think would be appropriate right now, and I think it's something to maybe PETA's committee can explore. I had a conversation with the courts today, I guess, and it relates to their need to use the county purchasing system even when they are a state-funded entity or have more affiliation with the state. And it was a very positive and productive conversation, mostly complimentary about our very short-staffed procurement office, Rose, Jim Stevenson, and others. But I think if there's any way our relationship to entities like the courts in terms of purchasing could be flagged in the report, it would be very beneficial. And the reason this seemed like the right time to bring it up is they were saying how on a routine basis, it's pretty smooth, but then they get these big influxes of money. For example, they're setting up a drug court, and that creates a whole need for a bunch of contracts specific to a project. Often the state funding will say you must use your county's purchasing process, so that's fine, it's flagged. And so I think somehow just making clear that this is a system that is in existence, that it works, but more staff would help, etc. So I'm looking at Peter shaking her head. I can make the connection through the subcommittee or whatever you recommend.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I've made a note of that and will incorporate that in our work going forward, but that's a great point. So we'll pursue with staff any other of those agencies that might be similar.
So I think I'll connect you now with Tim Sheridan with the Sheriff's Office, who wears many hats. The reason it seemed timely now was because, in fact, sometimes these are state funding streams that multiple jurisdictions are deploying, and using cooperative purchasing is what Rose and others recommend. Rose, you're probably familiar with this. In general, again, it was very complimentary, and I thought, something really important to recognize in many ways through the final report. So I'll send an email connecting you with Tim, and then maybe Rose can share who else we have similar relationships with.
That also dovetails with one of the recommendations that we heard from a number of our speakers, and that is woven in to part of the material that I put together, and that is expanding communication on procurement in the county, so that more people know what is available, so that everybody is working from the same page or the same foundation. If you think of my little
Yes, your matrix. Yes, and that came up too, that it's every few years, and so having a little primer to go back to, because these bigger ticket items are not routine, and so they would probably be better prepared and less of a burden, if you will, on our purchasing office if they were a little better versed reading ahead before they call Rose or Jim. But they were very complimentary, and that was great.
Rose, if I can ask you, just whenever I hear courts, my ears pick up. Are you given any kind of particular heads up that this is coming, or is there any sort of cyclical aspect to it? So there's a big calendar somewhere that's maintained in the county, so you understand that. I understand if the court decides, the circuit court decides we're going to have a drug court in the county all of a sudden, that's brand new. But I'm just wondering the extent to which things are dropped on your office as opposed to you're getting an appropriate amount of notice and maybe an opportunity for some input.
We don't receive proper notice. Most of the time we are purchasing, we're brought in probably midway's conversation, which, from a procurement standpoint, is pretty much behind the 8 ball for us. We really need to be there in the very beginning of any conversation. So no, we do not. We most of the time is midway, or it's just dropped on us. It's kind of like, oh, we need to get a purchase order, so let's call purchasing.
So Rose, do we have, speaking kind of in that same vein, there are some contracts that we know are going to come up periodically, right? We don't know whether or not we're going to extend them using an option year, but do we ask the departments to do any type of forecasting?
Yes, we do, but it's not adhered to, should I say. Everyone doesn't follow. We do have some departments that do a really good job at, just making sure at least 9 months out that they give us some sort of notification. And then some departments, they do not. But we do continuously advise agencies the importance by way of, just email, either through training, the importance of projecting and giving us that cushion room to properly resolicit.
So it might be good within these potential draft policy guidelines to incorporate something where, you make it a requirement for people, that way it's part of the standard procedures.
And that is correct. And I concur with that. I think another thing, if I can just throw out there, is just, just having the staff or maybe a person dedicated to, reviewing and being that liaison between purchasing and the agency to be a reminder, that this stuff is coming up, and just making sure that we have the adequate information we need to put out a proper solicitation. So I concur, Mayor Disson. Thank you.
But by doing that, you may also do something else, particularly if there's an opportunity to publish that information. You give folks who may not, often for the vendor community, if I find out about something the day it comes out on a bid, it reduces my likelihood of responding to it. But if there was some type of forecast that was published, or at least made aware to the public, you might get better responses.
Yes. Yep, I concur, and I do want to throw out there, I know that we've thrown out there the Workday implementation, and those type of things are a part of that conversation as well. Just trying to, figure out the reporting capabilities and how it can be beneficial to helping the department's forecasting, and also implementing a module specific to vendors to provide what you just mentioned, that, that heads up, that assistance to let them know when something is out for solicitation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say that Rose was another one who had sent in her roster of notes from our best practices. Pete also fed back a couple of comments today from the Victoria Steger email that I shared with everybody last night, which includes a lot of really good suggestions and resources, including green purchasing, Dan, for sustainability. And so all of those things still need more input from everybody else, as well as, and of course, Steve had sent in some stuff likewise. They all still need to be integrated, and additional input would be helpful. Because if you put them all side by side, you'll see there's duplications. And so they have to be sort of pulled together. Jasmine, maybe your plan is to do this, but if we set up a separate folder that's called, BP Compendium on SharePoint, then everybody knows where to go to see what has been considered, or at least submitted for consideration to date. And that'll give us a basic working draft material, because it's not even a draft yet, that I think will be helpful.
Yes, I can gladly set that up. Similar to how I'll be uploading Dan's email, probably just download the email as a PDF.
Yes, and Dan's email should go in there.
Mhm.
My email of the 18th should go in there. Rose's list should go in there, et cetera, so that it's, you know, a file folder that has all of our working material for best practices, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something I can take care of.
Thank you.
That'd be very helpful. And again, going back to an earlier comment, um, all of us can't just rely on PETA and Scott and Sheila to do all the best practices work. So I think it is important to go into that file. And I would ask all of those subcommittee chairs to do that, talk to their members, see what could be pulled out or highlighted with respect to your specific sections, and we can see how this will work best in the final report, whether we talk about what I would call sort of the predicate best practices pieces, which is the organization of a purchasing office, for example, the contract monitoring, data analytics, that sort of thing. But then there may be specific things. I'm just thinking of sustainability because Peter's email is in front of me here. There may be specific things where we'll say these are the core best practices, things that sort of launch the procurement process. But when you're procuring and thinking about sustainability, when you're procuring because you're looking for a construction contract or whatever it would be, if you're procuring and you want to encourage minority owned businesses, women-owned businesses, small businesses, these are the things in particular you should do. We can refer the reader of the final report to the subcommittee sections in those recommendations. So I'll just ask everybody to please focus on that in the next couple of weeks, so we can have some, start getting things drafted up again for the final report. But the idea of PETA having that put in a separate folder would be great.
I think it makes sense from another point of view, because we still have this issue of charter code manual, and the charter is going to be pretty clear. That's not something we're going to change, but the code, needs to be in fairly general terms on all the points you mentioned and a few others. And then the manual reflects the things that we've just discussed. But there may be a few things in best practices that, or otherwise, that need to be shifted over into the code, and we have to kind of sort that out so that the supportive documents, like what I just said on sustainability, shouldn't be in the code, but you have a statement in the code that says we're going to be sustainable as possible, that kind of thing. So we have some of that's going to require a little bit of teasing.
Yeah, and all that's they're all great thoughts everybody has. I just want to have us thinking about it now and trying to address it now before it's November 10th, and we have 3 weeks left to get the report done. So I appreciate everybody's efforts. Yes, Peter.
I do want to urge everybody to look closely at some of the material that Vicki Steger sent and that I forwarded, because the state has way more resources than the county does, and spent and used a lot of resources to put together their response to their commission recommendations. And so, for example, on green purchasing, there's a lot of really good stuff. The state also put together a different way to go about using job descriptions and the structure of the agency to actually facilitate recruitment and retention. I think it was Justina talked a little bit about that. Vicki talked a little bit about that as well. But there's some real meat in those documents. So as you're refining your thought processes about what, based on your subcommittees, have come across, do take a look at that so that we're not asking the county to reinvent the wheel when there's no need to do so. And just like the co-op purchasing, et cetera.
Sure, and that's a great point. And there is a lot of helpful material in there. And Dan, remind me if I'm mistaken, but I think you were on the state commission to reform procurement. And other people on the commission, on this commission, may have followed some of that, but there are links to that report. I was thinking a moment ago when Rose was talking about the courts, just as an example, because I don't want to get in trouble with the courts, but just as an example that the courts don't give perhaps all the notice they might, or involve the county purchasing folks as early as they this might be more than helpful. But looking at one of the things Victoria sent, which is and some of the other best practice folks do the same thing. Here's what you do to here. One general best practice is get started early and communicate with everybody who's going to be involved and constantly reevaluate the process. But it's involve those early on who ought to be involved. So we might remind the courts that got to take a look at the state's own best practices in that regard. Is there anything else about best practices? Yes, Pete, please.
Yeah, I read the email from Victoria Steger, and yeah, she has a lot of good information in there. Especially what I was impressed with was the emailer marketplace, and I know we use that through the state, but I was just wondering, it's also available, I think, to the counties for procurement practices. So I was just wondering who can answer the question, but how much is Baltimore County procurement involved with emailer marketplace?
So I can answer that question for you, Peter. So by law, Baltimore County is responsible for or required to post solicitations in email marketplace. So yes, we are involved. I have 2 office assistants that every time we post a solicitation, they go into email the marketplace, post it, and then provide directions that the documents are provided on our web page. So we do use them.
Good, good.
Yep.
That's great. Thank you. I thought you did. I just wanted to be sure.
And if I can just add, before we move forward from the
Sure.
Dr. Victoria Steger's conversation, she is actually going to be one of the speakers for the October MPPA, Maryland Public Purchasing Association, for that month on October the 14th. If there is some interest from the panel to just be a listener or be a part of that presentation, please let me know. She will be discussing, certifications, best, practice for certifications, qualifications, and the benefits of, procurement officers being certified. So if you're interested, let me know, and I can just put a little note to send everyone the invite once it's posted, and that's in October the 14th.
Thank you.
Good to know. Thank you. Okay, is everybody in agreement about how we're going to try to move forward on the best practices piece? Peter, if you or your group need additional help as we start writing all this up, please tell us. We'll do it. But I do, again, want all the subcommittees to take a look from their own perspective and the recommendations they've made and any new recommendations, so we can make certain we've covered all those bases beyond, again, what I keep calling the predicate best practices protocols, if you will.
One more thing on that subject, Phil, please.
Sure, of course.
In the email I sent out last night, I pulled out the way that the state constructed its table of contents with 5 or 6 headings. And then what they did was they basically hung all kinds of the rest of their recommendations into those key headings of their report, their final report. So as you're processing your subcommittee work and as you look at the materials that will be in this compendium folder that Jasmine's going to put up for us, think about what might make sense in terms of actually organizing the recommendations or not. Thanks.
No, absolutely. That'd be great. Okay. Great. Well, thank you everybody for that. Let's move on to item 2C, efficiency audit final report update. Elizabeth?
Yes, I'm about to share a PowerPoint that is both an update and an overview. What I'm attempting to do is let the commission know all of the topic areas that the consultants have flagged for recommendations, and you'll see it's about 8 slides, and it's a lot of topics. I cannot speak to the content. I do have their draft work in front of me, but I did not generate these materials, so this was not meant to be a presentation, and I really think the best way to share the content will be in a few weeks to share their actual work product with the commission so that you can decide how, if at all, you want to cross-reference their work. Their final report will be done by mid, if not mid, certainly late September. And while I recognize it bumps up against the final report deadline, I still think your reviewing their work is the best way to consider how to reference it. So I just wanted to state that up front because I do not feel comfortable speaking to all of the substance of their work. I see Beth smiling. Do you want to add anything, Beth?
No, I think that's very accurate, and I agree that the papers describe all of these slides much better, and we're happy to share those on your SharePoint however you'd like. That might help.
I'm trying to share it, but for some reason, Jasmine, can I get share access? That sometimes happens. Now, you'll recall that Bob Furman appeared at a prior meeting, and I will be the first to admit that it was a little bit to 30,000 feet. Some of those topics are still 30,000 feet, and I'm grateful that this commission is actually going to put much more meat on the bones, knowing both your dedication and what's been produced so far. So I think that if it means anything to you, this project is going to outshine the consultants in some areas. There are other areas, and I'm trying to share, so bear with me, where they have done a deep dive, and I think you may just want to cross-reference and leave it at that. Here we go. Oh, there we go. Can everybody see this? Okay. So just to recap, these are a variety of recommendations that have something to do with the procurement process and or related topics that this commission was asked to consider. Just so you know, and Rose, feel free to chime in, everything that they have looked at so far has been shared as draft with the county executive, and also they enlisted feedback from the respective departments. So this has not been sort of a one-off process. So just to recap. Oops.
If I could, Elizabeth.
Yes, please.
Yes, so the consultant definitely has had some meetings with purchasing as well as the purchasing agent at Blaze and the finance operational deputy director Bob Preston. And, you know, to your point, what you mentioned before, some of the recommendations were, you know, discussed. There was, you know, some that we, you know, either agree, disagree, or either they just felt very strongly that they just wanted to continue to put those recommendations in there, even after discussion. So as you go through it, if anyone has any questions, please, by all means, feel free to ask.
It doesn't mean Rose and I can answer. So let's get going. As this is, you know, this is a comprehensive assessment. It is including Baltimore County Public Schools. That final report will be presented to the school board in early September. I'm trying to recall if it includes purchasing. I'm sure it does, but I don't recall. I've been less involved in that. Beth, we could pull out those and share with the commission, though, now that I think about it. I'm just going to go over the ones impacting Baltimore County government, and you'll see here it's 11 recommendations, which include some of the areas the commission is tasked with, including fleet management. So you'll recall some of these, and again, some things you're looking at as well. Best value procurement practices. This is, topics that are the subject of their work. And again, you'll see the content of what they're suggesting. They're also focusing on interagency participation. Again, something that I know really was just discussed, just more communication, more, I guess, more advanced notice of what's coming down the pike. Performance data, the whole, increasing the approval authority to 100,000. We know that some of these things will be a heavy lift and there may be statutory change, but needed. But one of the things about, a consultant driven process is they put it on paper and then it's up to the county to decide what to do with their recommendations. But these are in these two bigger areas, these are the detailed areas that they've looked at. On the healthcare side, they've definitely made recommendations on, rebidding services, which I think some of this is, we have to do it anyway. I don't know. I'm just saying this is what they've put in writing. Currently, there's a requirement that all new hires get a physical with a particular healthcare provider. So they've recommended that be discontinued. And then applying savings to other areas of health insurance for county employees. I have not seen a recommendation on the pooling, Delegate Moorheim, but I realized I should double back and find out the status because I know they were looking at it.
Excuse me, Elizabeth.
Yes.
Is that statement actually correct that the services, the contract is expiring in June of next year? When that contract was renewed, I thought it was for more like 5 years. So I'm not sure that that's correct.
Well, I can look. Or better, I could look while you speak. I know there is interest.
I just pointed out it doesn't need to be answered right this moment.
Yeah, well, I hear internal discussion about this recommendation dovetailing with the need to begin to look at that. So
good.
I don't. I'm trying to think if I have anything. I don't, but I think we can get you. They do have some
opportunity to rebid services upon contract expiration, June 22nd. Is that June 22nd, 2022?
I assume.
Okay. That was our understanding. That was the next expiration date, but we will check both the contract and what they wrote.
Yeah, and this is the Mercy. This is the Mercy contract, right? I'm trying to.
Correct. It is.
Yeah, let me take a look at it and then I will put it in the chat box. Yeah, they're referencing the Mercy contract.
Yes. Talking about the Mercy contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Which is not health insurance. Yeah.
Different contract.
Yeah, this was contract. That's different contract. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, but this
and still be worth knowing the year because some contracts like that will run 2, 3, 4 years. That's all.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that Mercy contract expires sometime in November. I think that date is definitely wrong, but I'll take a look at it.
I think they may have been which is not surprising.
Oh, do we need to clarify that?
Yes, and I think they may be conflating two different health-related contracts. The difference between employee health insurance and then a contract that the county has with Mercy Health, which includes if employees get injured on the job, but then also this requirement that all new employees, regardless of their job function, undergo a pre-hiring physical exam. Not a drug test, a whole exam. So we can continue offline on all the bucket health care recommendations if you'd like. They attempted to look at purchasing with regard to the Office of Information Technology. I think there's some more work to do there, but they're going to give us what they have. But at least they touched on it somewhat. They did not do a deep dive into MBE-WBE improvements as both the disparity study and this commission has done. Their primary recommendation was related to DPWT, which kind of flagged the fact that there needs to be more cross-pollination with departments and have people at the department level who understand the goals of the program. And that's up in the survey results that I'll share at the end here. So some of what they found with regard to DPWT and MBEWB opportunities will, resonate with the other work that's been done, but certainly validate what we already know. I think Bob Freeman talked about the organizational and operational changes, some of which were flagged in the commission's interim report. The need for more training, funding for training. I know he flagged this last one, which I conflate these projects, I admit, but just, there are some non-procurement functions that they recommend to be transferred out. I think process, I remember. And was that in the interim report, Phil?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. He probably read the report and then put it in his. These recommendations are across different public works team members. So some were what Bob presented because Bob did them, and others, as we'll see, were done by other people. They also have some recommendations around service level agreements, which you all be able to see the details of what they shared. Again, we should have best practices, but I dare say what we've discovered through this commission's work is going to be much more hands-on, useful. So it should dovetail, but I expect our work will be more detailed on that. This is one that we are very glad they took a deep dive about fleet management and have recommended combining the management of these two different divisions within two departments regarding fleet across county departments. So I don't know that the commission had time to look at that yet, unless Steve, you're looking at it. But it is a full recommendation. So that will, I think, be of interest to you.
Yes, we are looking at it. We have a subcommittee of Pete and I, and we've actually done a little bit of work and have a pretty good draft narrative of background.
Okay.
And we were waiting for this to finalize what recommendations we would make also. So thank you, and that's great.
So Beth, she and I worked very closely trying to manage these consultants. Yesterday, they did a presentation of the county executive, and we worked hard to make sure in 3 hours they covered, I don't know, 100 and some recommendations. Beth, if you think, and you know best, which of these are really final. What I don't want to do is share with commissioners some of the sort of, it might be changed stuff, and then it gets changed. But I think some of these are pretty baked. Wouldn't you say, Beth?
I think most of them are. They're going to be making final changes over the next 2 weeks. We had quite a bit of input back from directors yesterday after the meeting, so I know there's a lot of conversation engaging for the rest of this week. So I would think by early next week at the latest, probably all of the final changes will be made.
So Phil, what I think is fair to commit to is, right after Labor Day, sharing the content of these recommendations.
Okay.
Even though the final report is not out, I'm just concerned that it'll get to be too late in the end of September to be useful to the commission.
No, I appreciate that.
So.
And I understand that things can always change at the last minute, but the sooner we get our respective hands on this and our eyes on it, it'd be great. And thank you, Steve and Pete, for already jumping in on fleet management. But we, knowing this was coming, we've been obviously anticipating it. And so if we could get something shortly after Labor Day, Elizabeth, that would be very helpful.
And again, as Beth just said, some of the holdup is changes based on department directors' feedback mostly for accuracy. There are recommendations that departments do not like. That doesn't mean they're not going to be recommended, nor does it mean because it's in the report, the county's going to take, everything and go ahead and do it. Right now, the back and forth with directors is to make sure two things. One, that sort of descriptions of what current is are accurate. And that's important for lots of reasons, but an issue because this project started in February, March, and it's now almost September. It was meant to be 6 months, but some departments have done things that are relevant to the work of the consultants. The county executive at yesterday's session specifically asked that everything reflect as best it can the current state of play. There's some IT systems that are recommended that have actually become, if not fully utilized, have had more implementation than is reflected in the consultant's work. So it's really this final updating for accuracy that we're looking to do in the next 2 weeks with department input. Okay, so telematics is another aspect of our fleet management that it may actually be further along than this suggests, but it's flagged as a recommendation area. And again, we've had, and I don't know, Steve probably could speak to it. There's just a lot of work to do around vehicles in the county. And this process has certainly allowed us to shed light on that. And I think ultimately we will have, I hope, some streamlined operations, and certain departments will feel like it's a better system for purchasing, for maintenance, and for phasing out vehicles that may be past their useful life for the work of the county. So my goal here was just to give you these bucket areas. I don't know the content, I admit that. I mean, I could look it up and read it to you, but I think what we've planned is the best way to go, is share the content, and then the commission can decide how to reference it, adopt it, whatever makes sense for each topic area.
Great.
Any other thoughts? I'm going to get to the survey and employee survey in a minute, but any other questions on these topic areas?
Are you able to share these with the commissioners, Elizabeth? The slides, can we have
Yeah,
copies
the
of
slides, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
These are our slides. I mean, they're not consultant property. Okay. So as you recall, the survey to county employees about their interface with purchasing was done through the consultant survey about more issues, just for ease of getting responses and not burdening people with multiple surveys. We did not have a great turnout. I think summer was a problem. We sent it out multiple times. I expected the consultants would do more follow-up. Whatever, of the 1,562 people, it's still interesting. So of the people who responded to this big survey, a quarter roughly reported that their job includes interface with purchasing. That's what it is out of the 1,500. And it looks so of the questions asked, and you all did design the questions, so you probably know better what they are. You know, for the most part, on the topics of communication, responsiveness, and timeliness, there's general satisfaction, certainly with communication, and with responsiveness. They're really all of them. So those are some of the basics. We can, and Beth, I don't know if we have any more data than what's on these slides, but if there is anything, we're happy to share it. Now,
Yes, they gave us the raw numbers, which just, total up to this, and we're happy to share that if you'd like to see that.
So I think this next slide was especially interesting. Beth, I'm going to let you speak to this one.
Okay. So there were a series of just different questions. For example, how many of the people responding have any kind of responsibility for contracts? And out of that 20-some% that responded, 19 said they did. How many need additional training? 39% said they still need training, and so on down the list. Procurement cards, about 33%. Obviously, only about 14% have received procurement training in the last 18 months. There was a question about, does everyone understand their ethical responsibilities within the roles of procurement? And that was a high percentage, 70% said they did. Did they have knowledge of fair and open competition? They believe they understand that, and they're following those practices. That's 80%. As well as another good one to know, I think, is the fact of how many have knowledge of supporting small and disadvantaged businesses and what goes along with that. They believe there's about 74%, 75% that understand that as well. And then we get into the NBE, SBE targets. There's a 48% understanding that they understand those targets. And then out of those that responded, about 34% have access to master agreements. So those were the answers to those questions.
So it's self-reported, and I'm not, that you have to, obviously that'll be captured if there's any use of this in the report, but Rose, do you have any perspective on this? We just got it yesterday, so I'm sorry we didn't share it in advance.
Yeah, I'm actually reviewing it now because I didn't, have a chance to,
I'm sorry about
that. No, that's fine. I know in reference to the training one, the one that stuck out to me is no, normally we would have, prior to COVID, we would have an annual training, which would be a combination of purchasing, the Office of Law and the MBEWE office, but due to COVID, we didn't have it during March, which is what we typically do, but we do attend on reintroducing that training again next March, and we target March because it's March purchasing month, so it just goes hand in hand with that. In reference to, I'm not under, so 33% folks have procurement cards, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what, yeah.
That's what.
So we weren't given a whole lot of detail other than sort of the question. We can, again, we're happy to share all of that raw data with you if you'd like it.
Yeah, I would like to see it so I can, better, understand, some of the percentages. I mean, some of them were good. And again, the high areas is reference to fair, open competition. That is something that we do, go over during our annual training, as well as providing definition and understanding of small and disadvantaged businesses. We even go into detail on how to use the MDOT directory to locate those type of businesses.
If I could comment, Dan, here. They're interesting numbers. I just don't have a frame of reference to put these in. Back to that first slide where it was about, the dissatisfied was about roughly 20 to 26% across the three categories. I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, I can argue it both ways. Likewise, received ethical explanations of position, 70% sounds good, but that also means 30%, I guess, kind of unaware of their ethical positions. So it's useful, but I don't know how these compare to anything. I don't sense what the frame of reference is. At least that's my feeling on this.
Yeah, no, and that's sort of the downside of like a broad survey where you don't really have a good sense of who responded to specific questions. If we had sent this to people who only do purchasing related work, it might have a different meaning.
I mean, the knowledge of MBE at 48%, it's doesn't look good if it's across the board, but if it's 100% of the people who deal with purchasing, then it's great. So
yeah, I don't.
There's no reason certain people need to know that, but the people who do need to know should be 98 or 99 or 100%. That's all I'm really saying. Thank you.
There's also
go ahead, Peter.
There's also the halo effect in self-reporting like this. So you have to take it with a certain grain of salt, but it would be useful to know of the 1,562 responses, that represents, what percentage of the county employees did they come from? Can we identify which department they came from? A few more of that kind of information would be useful. But I will say, even taking even sending the survey, even the ones who didn't fill out the survey, it's another communication that says, this is important. You should be paying attention to it. Resources are available. And so that's not a bad thing.
No, thank you, Peter. And I was going to add to Dan's comment about the context. I have the questions in front of me here, but this ability to access master agreements, 34%. Again, without knowing who should have the ability, and whether that means the technical ability, the legal authority, or any sort of knowledge that there are master agreements out there. It's a little hard to sort that out. So I don't know if there's some other information behind this, the raw numbers or some contextual information that might help us sort through this a little bit as we do take it with a grain of salt. If that exists, Elizabeth and Beth, it'd be helpful to have that.
Sure.
We can certainly ask. I don't think we're going to have too much more information about who specifically filled it out, because I don't believe that we asked globally. Well, we did ask what department, but we don't tie what department they're with their response is, I don't think.
So not a general profile of who they were, male, female, where they were, none of that was done.
I think do you remember, Beth? Because I think we asked where they work, but that doesn't mean that they have knowledge or responsibility for purchasing. That's probably the flaw here.
Right, and I think that's where this gets very vague, because we don't know out of the people that responded what cross sector that was across the whole county, what their overall responsibilities are, and I think that's where the meaning really is lacking here. But we'll circle back and see if there's any other identifiers that would better help understand it.
Mm-hmm. There may be more cross-referencing from the consultants did this, so we have to go back and ask them these questions. So any others that you have, if either share them through Jasmine or even put them in the chat if they occur to you as we move on to the vendor survey.
Great. Any other comments about this before we go to the vendor survey?
May I?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
Go ahead, Rose.
Sure.
I would just want to add, and I don't know how much time we, may have to spend on, or whether it's beneficial to send out another employee survey, but perhaps maybe targeting the individuals that have access to Advantage. Most of those who have access to Advantage would have some sort of dealing with the purchasing department, because it kind of go hands to hands. I don't know.
I think that's a good idea, Rose. And I say that because when you see the next data set where we took it upon ourselves, not going through the consultants to do the vendor survey and the analysis, Jasmine's on, of course, it's far more useful. And I defer to Phil, but I do think there's time to do that.
Well, if you need me to, if that is a decision, I can we can pull a list of those employees who have Advantage access, and then we can just target that group for email to complete the survey.
And can do the analysis, which is what you're about to see.
Yeah, Rose, I think that would be much more impactful, and then that way people wouldn't feel so burnt out, since it's a smaller subset of employees, and they'll understand why we need to do a follow-up.
Phil, would you like us to do that, or commission?
Mindful of all the other things you guys are doing, yes, I think it would be helpful to do that.
Okay.
And just a relatively short response period, because somebody, BC Stat, I guess, has got to put the information together, and then the commission's got to be able to read it and think about it and figure out how to use it. But I think it'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we can do that.
Great.
The other thing I would suggest, or the discussion and following on with Rose's comments, is that this is something that should be done every year, both as part of the messaging about the importance and the rules and regulations about procurement, and also what the resources are available. And now that we know where some of the holes are, even though it's not necessarily always good practice to change a survey from one year to the next, doing it again next year would give the county an opportunity to make those improvements to the survey questions. And also, it's another form of performance metrics. You know, how are people's knowledge and attitudes changed over the course of time?
Good idea.
Yeah, and I'm
We
thinking,
paid for this survey?
no, neither. So, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get back to, let me stop sharing. We did not. I mean, it's part of, so the consultants who were on a big contract were doing a survey anyway, and we embedded these questions in. So no, and then what you're about to see, you know, all of you and Rose's shop sent it out to vendors, and then our internal data analyst did the work. So I guess no, not separately. I think, I mean, anything else on this, Phil, or should we move to what I think the vendor surveys?
Yeah, I'm ready for the vendor surveys unless anybody else on the commission has any further questions about the internal survey. Seeing and hearing none, let's go to the vendor survey, please.
All right, so you should, well, now it's not sharing the right screen. Hold on a moment.
We see, I see it.
See the front page.
Yeah,
Trying to switch to,
a different mode.
yeah.
Yeah,
Elizabeth can commiserate because when it's regular WebEx, sharing is one way. When it's
right.
event like this, it's another way. So
Yeah,
now you
and
should be able to see the right screen.
yeah,
All right,
there.
so just an overview as a reminder, we did 2 procurement surveys. The link went out to well over 5,000 email addresses. We did 2 links, one for existing vendors and the other one for potential county vendors. Folks had to self-select. The paragraph was like, if you've never done business, click here. If you have or currently doing business, click there. So this is an evaluation. You'll see it'll go back from potential and current or past vendors. So by and large, it looks like we got a good spread of different types of vendors. I did not know that we had this many medical services vendors in our universe, but that was a lot. You won't be shocked that it was IT and construction following up. So most of these folks, they've never submitted a bid, it's over 70%. Some, you'll see this, they perceive that the process favors current contractors. So there is some, I think, communication and outreach we need to do. Second and third were the requirements being cumbersome and the bidding process. So most were not aware that opportunity is available online. And sadly, 60% did not know we had an MBWE office. So outreach that we could be doing there is clear. Most knew that we did assign goals, but most also did not know they could get notifications online. So there's another area for outreach. This is just more about what we have online, because if they knew, I think this tracks. People didn't know we posted them online, so obviously they didn't know that you could see where the solicitations were. But most of the vendors did know about Emma, so that's good to know. Just more follow-up about potential vendors and things they did not know about. So most of these people had not been to a Meet the Primes event. I think the next one being virtual will probably be really helpful because they've been in person prior. And we've done a great job, I think, throughout the pandemic of getting new people engaged through virtual environments. The
You know,
OG.
just
Mhm.
one quick thing before you move on about the Meet the Prime, because I participate, we have a table and everything, and what I noticed in the beginning, it was really well attended. And I could see where in the last couple of years, though, it was not as well attended. And even though you had so many contractors from the Maryland, Virginia area, the feedback that we got was that nothing really materialized, you know, as far as, even though they bring those opportunities, just nothing materialized. So it was a waste of time for people to spend from 8 to noon out there. So that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, but it sounds like we need to work more with the primes about strengthening, you know, those pipelines and being more proactive, meeting them as
And
an.
also based on the companies that you invite, as well as, you know, since the county doesn't do the forecasting, things like that. I mean, I think that also helps.
Mhm.
It becomes like a form of exercise just to say we did it.
Mhm. That's good feedback. So we know our ORG is relatively new, and most of the folks did not know that PATH was a way to, you know, report fraud and waste. So just a summary from that. So we realized there's a lot more communication we need to be doing to potential vendors about, one, our MBWE office that is growing. Two, we need to uplift, I guess, probably our online presence so folks know where to register to get solicitations. And Emma is a great way to pull them in because they're already familiar with it. So current vendors, overwhelmingly, they consider the process easy or simple. They like the communication, fair and timely. I think that was really, really good in terms of perception. But what did they dislike? The MBEW, MBE percentages. Second was nothing. Third was the advertising. So it's challenging that on one hand, we are well aware of a gap in having minority and women-owned businesses in our network, but it seems like the primes consider the goals unattainable. So there's a disconnect there. There's also still a mention of favoritism or a perception of favoritism. So we have, once again, a image issue that we need to address. So we had 40% were providers, over 50% were business owners. People also, you know, could be in multiple categories, so this is exceeds 100%. Less than 20 were in BWE, but I still think that's a good percentage of folks that replied. So I think what jumped out to me was that folks considered or rated highly that the solicitations are clear and easy to understand. Payments are processed timely manner. The standard contract form is fair. The purchasing staff is responsive, as well as the agency staff. So I think that's really great for showing how busy and how many contracts we do and the perceptions that we are counteracting. So I'll end with that one. This was the analysis we did based on the questions you all developed. So I sent it around. I also put it in SharePoint for you all to review.
Thank you, Jasmine. That I found to be a far more helpful presentation of information than not comparing Elizabeth to Jasmine. I'm talking about the survey reports, just to be
Never be
clear.
as good as Elizabeth, okay?
No,
Yeah.
Try, but the bar has to be high.
What it shows is external versus internal resources. So if we go the route that Rose suggested and take the survey questions for employees and target it as an internal matter just to those who are really involved in the procurement process. We'll know who we're hearing from, and then the same BC Stat team that works for me will do the analysis, and I think we'll get a better read, and we'll have time to do that.
Great.
I do have a question, Elizabeth, on that. Because one of our concerns has been that there are people in the county who are doing procurement that aren't taking the training at all. And so how to incorporate those people in this second survey?
I mean, I defer to Rose. I think it's really hard. I mean, how could they be doing procurement, Rose, and not have access to Advantage, the system that we're gonna use to
Well,
drive
I
our
mean,
survey people? Yeah.
I would say those folks will be department head folks. They don't really have access to Advantage because, Advantage is, pretty much more like a data entry type system, to start the procurement process. But, most of the, department heads do have some responsibility, especially when it comes to, putting together the specifications, the scope of services, and
Oh.
yes, at some point approving, the requisition or the delivery order. So I guess in addition to targeting those folks who have access to the Advantage system, maybe targeting the department head email list.
Yeah, I can do that and maybe ask them to share with their deputies who might be responsible for operations.
Correct. Yeah. Normally when we try to get the whole group, we put the responsibility on the department heads to, distribute to the appropriate folks in their department. So that may be a way to go.
I mean, I see my colleagues, Rob O'Connor and Ed Blades on here, and I don't know if they've been listening to us on this, but, Ed and Rob, are there any other email lists that would capture the right department folks that interface with purchasing?
There is a email list and a user list for all financial users within Advantage.
So we could definitely tap that.
Yeah, we get that. That's, typically when we, not trying to be funny, but when we have to send notification of upgrades or changes, things like that, we reach out to all those end users. So that's a good start.
So Rose, that's the list you've already asked Michelle for, right? On the email?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Rob, do you prefer me to work with someone else? I just looped in Michelle because she's pretty much infusing. She's my go-to person for the list of AFIN users.
Michelle will have that, but we can also work through. I mean, it should be. I think there's a DL for it already, Rose. So
okay.
I'm in the car right now because my driver's license expired 4 weeks ago. Thank God there is a moratorium.
Oh gosh, Rob.
Yeah, watch what you say.
Drive carefully.
Yeah.
Because of COVID, over 1 year. So there is a DL. I will take a look tonight and see if I can find that DL, but that goes to breakdown of all those individuals.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Yeah, maybe you guys can coordinate that offline, but we appreciate that whatever is helpful and be great. Yes, Dan.
All this reminds me of one topic I left out of the cooperative purchasing discussion, and it has some relevance to everything else that's coming between in and out. And that is that when we have when we're dealing with a larger national entity or a regional entity, the standards for sustainability, minority women business, and so forth may be different in those entities or non-existent potentially than what we have. And so one of the other things, and I remember I said 3 things and I got 2 out and I blanked on the 3rd, but now it's come back to me, that when we are dealing with larger consortiums, those questions should be asked. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but you should know. So doing a larger entity for purchasing something and there's no MBE requirement may cause us to think twice about it, or no sustainability requirement, or different than ours, but we ought to know those things on these larger purchases. So the concept that was that if doing consortium buyings, at least that and the other relevant questions that we've gone over here, don't need to list them all, should be asked. and be part of the consideration, not a veto, not a stop, but at least understood.
That's a great point. Great point. Okay, anything else on surveys? Very helpful to have that information. And again, I thank everybody who worked so hard on putting questions together and everybody at the county who's helped pull the information together. It's a lot of things to think about.
So
Yes.
can I ask a question? Because I'm looking at the survey numbers, and I know you started out by saying, Jasmine, there were approximately 5,000 people on distribution list. But if I'm looking at these numbers, only 117 of current vendors and 80 some, interested parties who are not current vendors. Universe is pretty large, but the response in the scheme of things, good responses, informative, but relatively small. Rose, how many current vendors do we have? I know that came up somewhere before.
I will have to pull our database, and please note that the vendor database may even include those that we've only done business with, like, once. But I would say it's safe to say that we have at least approximately 1,400 active master agreements. So at least, that many vendors we do business with.
Okay. So we're less than 10% on the existing vendors that responded. Okay. I mean, that may not be that bad.
Okay.
Well, that's a great segue to the last item, which is 2E, which is the planning for the September 9 public input meeting, because maybe Scott, some of those vendors will show up for that. I had a couple of questions, which I'll ask Elizabeth and Jasmine or anyone else from the county who has the information to fill us in on in terms of just the logistics and the invitations and the like. One thing we did talk about, I think, at the August 12 meeting, or maybe I just thought of it this morning, but let me bring it up now. I think it would be helpful. This is going to be from 4:30 to 6. And I think it'd be helpful, and we'll send a reminder out in advance, if commissioners could be signed in on and ready to go by 4:15. We can cover any last minute things, logistical items or the like, so that when we're ready to go live at 4:30, we're all present and accounted for. That was one item. But let me, Elizabeth or Jasmine, and where do we stand in terms of invites? Are people signed up? Do they need to sign up? What's the audio and or visual aspect of it for those who are coming to speak to us? Anything else you can share?
Yeah, so I've that's about rolling with working with Scott's Decline to execute this event. Just need to do some follow up with him. In terms of outreach, and I wanted to vet this with the group before I proceeded ahead. So we could do a similar email blast, and I can work with our comm side to develop a flyer and then potentially post on our social pages. But if that's fine with you all, I'm happy to move that route. I can move pretty quickly. But I wondered if there were, once again, organizations and business groups that you all wanted to reach out to directly to solicit folks to speak. If there's any people that come to mind that would be fearless and open-minded to share, so that we could do direct invites. That has worked well for us in the past in other situations, to do targeted, proactive invitations in addition to broad ones.
So
Yeah, I can check with some of our members and then get back to you if there's any.
I think that would be perfect.
I would just directly.
Yeah. Pete, anybody, any vendor organizations you're aware of that we ought to be directing this to? I think you're muted.
Yeah, we used to have a Baltimore County Contractors Association, but that doesn't exist anymore. basically we ran out of topics to complain about. Everything seemed to be working pretty good, and we didn't. It disbanded 2 years ago, so I'm not sure really who we could send it to.
You know, any contracting groups, industry
Probably
folks?
probably the utility Maryland utility contractors of Maryland. They're very involved in here in Baltimore County because there's a lot of utility contracts that are being let. So that would be the best utility contractors of Maryland.
I think the easiest way for these groups, if you all could share with me a point of contact and I can ask them to share with their members, that might be the easiest way.
Let me ask you a favor, Jasmine. Would you either later today or tomorrow send everybody, all the commissioners, an email just reminding them of this ask so that we all give it some thought and get something back to you promptly. So I think all of us would agree the larger the potential pool of or the pool of potential speakers, the better.
I'll also add, and I'll send this to you, but Steve, you may have something as well. The Maryland Society of Professional Engineers and the local chapter of AIA.
Great suggestions.
Yes, ma'am. And there's an American Consulting Engineers Council also that got the engineering procurement summary from. So I'll send that to Jasmine as well.
Thank you.
Great.
May I ask what advertising platform will be used to get the invite out?
Good old email.
Okay, I would just, suggest, because we've talked about this, is maybe reaching out to someone from the state in reference to email and marketplace advantage. Maybe they have some sort of notification platform.
Okay. Yeah.
That, as the vendors log in, it can be right there on their first page.
It's a wonderful suggestion. I will also add that to my contact list.
Okay.
Great suggestion. Thank you. And so the idea, I believe, is that those people who come up to speak will be given 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Show of hands. How many people like 2 minutes? 2 minutes, 3 minutes? Okay. Okay. And is there, Elizabeth, Jasmine, is there going to be sort of pre-registration so we know we have 50 people or 5 people?
Yes, we can ask for pre-registration with the sign up.
And are they going to be audio only or audio and visual as they speak?
So the folks that we invite to speak, I believe we can do audio and visual. Everyone else would be like this on a WebEx event where we wouldn't see them, but they'd be able to hear and comment in the chat.
Okay. And I think the idea would be that we take comments. Well, obviously, we'll be taking notes and we'll thank everybody who speaks, but we'll, we won't start up a dialogue unless only 3 people sign up and we've got an hour and a half and everybody can have 30 minutes. We can all have a long conversation. Other questions anybody have on that?
Unless I missed it, could you send out the invitation so we can forward out to my local chamber of commerce, for example, some other groups?
Yep. Hopefully I can have it to you at the top of the week because what I want is to make it a nice flyer, a PDF, but I need to just double check on my OIT side that I have the right information.
Great. Any other questions, thoughts, items of interest regarding the September 9 public input meeting?
I'm one of those voting for 3 minutes. That
3
seems
minutes.
to be relatively standard. It's not too short, but it's not too long.
I'm 3 minutes it is. 3 minutes it is. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the agenda. And it looks like we have a minute left, but obviously we can go on longer if need be. Anything else for the good of the order? Anyone?
Yes, the sustainability group had a discussion before the last meeting, and we got some information from Jen Iosa, who's the new sustainability manager. I think our general consensus was we would stay with the general statements that we made, and after this discussion, add her comments along with others into sort of that folder of additional stuff. Her outline was pretty much what the county is doing now, whereas we felt also that that was good, but there were other things that could be added, and sort of a broader vision would be in the code. So that's where we're at with that.
Okay.
Phil, I got never mind. I'll wait.
I'm sorry, Scott. I think I spoke over you.
No, I thought you might wanted to respond to Dan, and then I just have one item.
Yeah, no, I was going to say what I would suggest. Thank you, Dan, and your group. Whatever you want to write up, let's write it up as soon as we have it. Then we can figure out how we use it. I'm not trying to get anybody fired up if we use it, but let's just, the sooner we can be making those kinds of decisions and conversations.
Peter provided, we pretty much, I think, covered the input. So
yeah.
I'll try to organize it in some manner in the next period.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure. I wanted to raise this earlier, but I wasn't sure that it fit. Early in our discussions, and also in Dr. Ramsey's presentation, there were questions raised about, specifically to the MBEPs, where those goals would set and whether we would drive goals to various departments. It doesn't appear that that made it into the slides that Dr. Ramsey presented. At least, she didn't talk about that, and it didn't seem to make it into the slides. It seems to me that that is still an important thing. It also didn't make it into our interim report. But that MBE and meeting MBE goals has to be a shared responsibility in my mind. I think our MBE committee talked about that. And I think we were waiting to see if it was going to be in Dr. Ramsey's report before we made any recommendations. I don't want to speak for my colleagues in the MBE piece, but I do think it's important, and my sense is it should be in there somewhere before we wrap this up. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I'll talk to Sheila and to Carla and a few other folks to make sure we include that. Sure,
understood. And same thing I said to Dan. Please draft something up. The other thing I'll say, and I'm sure everybody remembers, but let me just say it. We can get additional time, or the subcommittee, when I say we, the whole commission, or the subcommittee can get additional time with Dr. Ramsey. So to that point, Scott, if there's some input or some discussion or some consultation you guys would like to have to inform whatever you draft, to have that with her, that can be arranged. I think I'm right about that, Elizabeth. We still have some access to Dr. Ramsey. I'm not suggesting you do or don't, Scott, but I think it's available.
In fact, the CAO would very much like for us to use the hours that we asked for. I think is as many as 10. So we should definitely schedule that. And I do want to chime in that what Jasmine said at the outset of the prior discussion, we have found that if there are some specific invitations for people to present, it just starts to frame the conversation. And I think if we could do that, as well as sort of the broader solicitation for speakers on the 9th, both together would make for a very helpful meeting.
Great. Yes,
I have a question. Elizabeth, I thought that the county executive was going to be scheduling an announcement related to new goals, changes in goals, et cetera, that would derive, that the county would be deriving from Dr. Ramsey's study. And so that's one reason why we hadn't tried to frame it before. Am I misremembering?
I'm not sure the timing of that. And I think, Jasmine, we need to check back with Savitra and the CAO, because I know there's some more additional time on that contract, not just for the commission, and it may feed into what you're referring to, PETA. So we need to double back on what the plan is for the additional work with Dr. Ramsey in total, not just for the commission, and then we can get back to you. But we are expected to engage, you, the commission, for at least another 10 hours. Or up to, I should say, 10 hours.
We could although Dr. Ramsey clearly has other excellent talents, maybe she'd like to help us copy edit the report if we need it. So anyway, let's try to use her substantively because it's a great resource. Okay, anything else, anybody? All right, well, with that, I will say we are adjourned. See you on the 9th. Thank you all again very much. A pleasure and privilege to serve with you. Take care.